$300 in silver coins. That's what Eliza Hart's stepfather accepted to sell her to a man who'd buried 3 wives. She stole a dying horse and ran into the Arizona desert. A stranger on a gray horse followed her for 2 days, never speaking, never approaching, just watching. When they finally caught her, the stranger made his move. Hit subscribe if you love stories where heroes emerge from nowhere. Drop a comment. What city are you from? Eliza Hart's fingers trembled as she pressed against the hallway wall wood rough under her palms. Through the crack in the door, she watched her stepfather count coins. $300 in silver stacked on the table like her life had weight that could be measured. The man across from him, Marcus Dalton, had hands soft as a woman's and eyes like river stones. Dead things. She a virgin? Dalton asked. The question hung in the stale air. Eliza's stomach turned. Far as I know. Her stepfather's voice carried the same tone he used when selling horses. Casual, transactional. Good, I'll pay $400 if you guarantee it. The sound of coins hitting wood was the sound of her childhood ending. Eliza backed away from the door, her heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. 6 months. 6 months since her mother died and left her alone with this man who'd married into their family and consumed it like a cancer. 6 months of watching him look at her differently. Not like a daughter, like inventory. She turned and ran, not out the front where they'd see her, through the kitchen, through the back door that stuck in summer heat, into the brutal Arizona sun that hit her face like an open hand. August, high noon, the kind of heat that killed dogs and baked mud into pottery. The barn was 15 yards away, might as well have been 15 miles. Her boots kicked up dust as she ran, skirts tangling around her legs, the small canvas bag she'd packed 3 weeks ago, bouncing against her hip. She'd known this was coming, had felt it in the way Dalton visited more frequently, stayed longer, watched her with the patience of a man who'd already made his purchase and was simply waiting for delivery. The barn door swung open under her hands, 6 horses in the corral beyond. She needed the fastest, the strongest, the one that could carry her 30 miles north to Prescott, where she could disappear into crowds and anonymity. But the best horses would be missed immediately. Sadie lifted her head as Eliza approached. 15 years old, bay coat, dull with age, one eye clouded with cataracts, left foreleg with a permanent limp from a break that never healed right. Her stepfather had said she'd be shot before winter. Nobody looked at her anymore. Perfect. Hey, girl. Eliza's voice shook. She grabbed the bridle she'd hidden in the feed room last week, her movements quick despite the trembling in her hands. It's just me. Just Eliza. We're going to help each other today. The mare's ears flicked forward, then back. Confused but patient. Eliza slipped the bridle over Sadie's head, fingers working buckles she'd known since childhood. Her mother had taught her to ride before she could read. Taught her that a woman needed to know horses as well as any man needed to be able to saddle and bridle and control 1,000 pounds of muscle with nothing but voice and pressure. You can't own a thing you can't control, her mother had said. Remember that. The memory made Eliza's throat close. No saddle. A saddle would be noticed. She'd ridden bareback before hundreds of times, her mother insisting she learn to feel the horse's movement through her whole body, not just through stirrups and leather. Miss Eliza, the voice froze her blood. Tommy, the ranch hand's 12-year-old son, standing at the corral gate with eyes too wide, understanding already dawning across his freckled face. Eliza turned slowly, trying to keep her breathing steady. Tommy, is it true? His voice was small. Is Mr. Dalton really poor? Yes. The word came out harder than she intended. Tommy flinched. And I'm leaving right now. She led Sadie toward the gate, toward this boy who could scream for help, could stop everything. You didn't see me here. You understand. Tommy looked at the horse, at the bridle, at the bag across her back. His father had been beaten half to death over a water dispute last year, left in the dirt by men who thought power gave them the right to anything. He knew what monsters looked like. Gates stuck on the east side, he said carefully. Been stuck all week. Real hard to close. If a smart horse wanted to get out, she probably could push right through it. Eliza felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, opening. Thank you. Miss Eliza, Tommy's voice stopped her as she moved past. My mama says the desert kills folks who don't respect it. Says you need water and you need to stay out of the sun. I know. She managed a smile she didn't feel. I'll be careful. Where you going to go? North, far as this horse will take me. That ain't very far. Tommy looked at Sadie's bad leg. She's half lame and mostly blind. Then I guess we're a good match. Eliza swung herself onto the mare's back, feeling bones prominent beneath her. Because I'm half crazy and mostly desperate, she pressed her heels to Sadie's sides. The old mare moved forward slowly with a pronounced limp, but she moved. Tommy ran ahead and opened the east gate, then wedged it open with a rock like he'd found it that way. Eliza rode through without looking back. The moment she cleared the ranch property, she urged Sadie into a trot. The mare protested, her gait uneven and painful to watch, but she tried. God, she tried. Eliza leaned low over her neck, whispering encouragement, and pointed her toward the rocky hills that rose like broken teeth against the northern horizon. She'd studied maps, listened to ranch hands talk. 30 miles north was Prescott, big enough to disappear in, far enough that Marcus Dalton's reach might not extend there. Between here and there was desert, arroyos, rattlesnakes, death. But behind her was definitely death, slower, more horrible. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. The sun climbed higher. Liza had been riding for 3 hours when the heat became something living, something with weight and intention. It pressed down on her shoulders, squeezed her lungs, made breathing feel like drinking fire. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. Her lips cracked and bled. The canvas bag across her back felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Inside, one canteen, half full. A knife, $27 from selling her mother's jewelry. A battered map, everything she owned in the world. Sadie's breathing grew labored. The mare's head drooped lower. With each step, her movements becoming more uneven. Eliza walked her more than she rode, trying to conserve the horse's strength, but she could feel the animal failing beneath her. The landscape changed from brown to white, from scrub grass to bare rock and sand. Heat waves rose from the ground in rippling curtains that made the horizon dance and shimmer. In the distance, something moved. Eliza shaded her eyes against the glare, squinting. Riders, 3 of them, maybe 2 miles back, moving fast. Her heart dropped into her stomach. They'd found her already. Of course they had. Her stepfather would have checked on his merchandise the moment Dalton left, would have seen her missing, would have sent his men after her. And Marcus Dalton's men would be coming too. Sadie, she pressed her heels into the mare's sides, urgency making her voice sharp. I'm sorry, girl, but we have to run. The horse tried. She broke into a lurching, painful canter that covered maybe 20 yards before her bad leg buckled. Eliza felt the mare stumble, felt her try to catch herself, and then they were both going down. She kicked free of the horse's body and rolled rocks, tearing at her dress and skin. When she came to a stop, her shoulder screaming with pain, she looked back to see Sadie on her side, breathing hard, unable to rise. No, Eliza's voice came out as a whisper. No, please, get up, please. She scrambled back to the horse, hands hovering over the animal's heaving flanks. But Sadie's eyes, those cloudy, tired eyes, just looked at her with something like relief. The mare had been in pain for years. Maybe this was mercy. Eliza choked on a sob. She pressed her forehead to the horse's neck, felt the rapid, fluttering heartbeat beneath the skin. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I asked this of you. The voices behind her were getting closer. She could hear individual words now, shouted commands, the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. With shaking hands, Eliza pulled her small canvas bag free. She looked at the horizon. Flat, brutal, endless. The riders were less than a mile away now. She stood, kissed her palm, pressed it to Sadie's forehead. Thank you for trying. Then she ran. The desert floor was treacherous. Loose rock, hidden holes, clusters of barrel cactus waiting to tear skin. Eliza ran anyway, her boots slipping and sliding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sun beat down like a physical weight, pressing her into the earth. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. Her vision swam. She made it maybe half a mile before her legs gave out. She fell to her knees behind a cluster of rocks, pressing herself into what little shade they offered. Her lungs burned. Her head swam. When she raised the canteen to her lips, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. Don't drink too much. Make it last. She allowed herself 3 small swallows, then forced the canteen away from her mouth. The water was already warm, tasting of metal and dust. The sound of horses grew louder, then stopped. "Found the horse!" A man's voice shouted. "She's on foot." "Can't have gone far," another voice answered. "Spread out! Find her!" Eliza pressed herself flatter against the rocks, trying to quiet her breathing. Through gaps in the stone, she could see them. 4 men now, not 3. They'd split up, moving in a wide arc, searching. One of them was Jake Morrison, her stepfather's foreman. The others she didn't recognize, but from their hard faces and the rifles across their saddles, she knew exactly what kind of men they were. The kind Marcus Dalton hired to keep his wives from running. Jake dismounted, studying the ground. He was a tracker. A good one. He'd find her trail in minutes. Eliza pulled the knife from her bag. It was small, meant for cutting rope or cleaning game, but the blade was sharp. She held it in front of her with both hands, trying to stop them from shaking. If they caught her, she wouldn't go easy. She'd make them regret it. "Christ, it's hot." One of the men stopped his horse, less than 30 feet from where Eliza hid. "Girl's probably dead already. Dalton's going to be pissed. He paid $400 for a corpse." "She ain't dead yet." Jake's voice was closer. Too close. "But she will be soon. No water, no shelter, and she took the lame horse. Stupid girl. Desperate girl." The first man corrected. "Can't say I blame her. Dalton's last wife lasted, 6 months? 5. Jake spat on the ground. "But that ain't our concern. We find her, we bring her back, we collect our pay. What happens after that is between her and her new husband." Some husband. But the man didn't argue further. They moved on, their horses' hooves crunching over rocky ground. Eliza waited, counting her heartbeats until the sound faded into the distance. Then she waited longer. Finally, when she couldn't hear them anymore, she moved. Not back the way she'd come. They'd be watching for that. Not north toward Prescott. They'd expect that too. Instead, she turned northwest, toward the broken badlands where the rock formations grew twisted and strange, where a person could hide in 100 different crevices and shadows, where a person could also die alone and never be found. She walked. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and the temperature climbed with it. 100 degrees, 110, 120. The air itself seemed to shimmer and burn. Eliza's lips cracked and bled. Her head pounded. She stumbled over rocks. She should have seen her vision swimming with heat and exhaustion. "Keep moving. Don't stop. If you stop, you die." But her body had other ideas. Her legs felt like water, like they belonged to someone else. The horizon tilted and swayed. She fell, caught herself, stood. Fell again. This time getting up took longer. Water. Need water. She fumbled for the canteen, brought it to her lips, forced herself to stop after 2 swallows. The water barely touched her thirst. She had maybe 1 day's supply left, if that. The sun was directly overhead now. There was no shade anywhere. The landscape had turned alien. Red rock and white sand, and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Heat waves rose from the ground in rippling curtains. In the distance, something moved. But when Eliza tried to focus on it, it disappeared. Hallucination. She walked, fell, walked. The knife slipped from her fingers, and she almost didn't stop to pick it up. The canvas bag seemed to weigh 100 pounds. Her dress, once blue, was now gray with dust and dark with sweat. Time became meaningless. There was only heat, thirst. The endless rhythm of step, 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 fall, rise, step, step, step. She didn't hear the riders return until they were almost on top of her. There, Eliza's head snapped up. 3 of them, 50 yards away and closing fast. Jake Morrison in the lead, his face grim and determined. She ran, or tried to. Her legs gave out after 10 steps, and she went down hard, tasting blood and dirt. She rolled onto her back, raising the knife with both hands, and heard herself making sounds. Animal sounds, desperate sounds. Easy now. Jake dismounted. His shadow fell across her like a blessing and a curse. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I won't go back. Eliza's voice was a raw croak. I'll die first. You are going to die out here anyway, girl. At least Dalton's place has water and a grave. His last 3 wives all have graves. Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. That ain't my business. Then make it your business. Eliza tried to sit up, but her head spun. Help me, please. You know what he is. You know what he'll do to me. I know I got a job to do. But Jake wouldn't meet her eyes. And I know your stepfather's got my wages held until I bring you back. I got a family to feed through winter. I have money. $27. It's yours. All of it. Just tell them you couldn't find me. Tell them I died out here. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something like sympathy flicker across Jake's weathered face. Then it hardened again. $27 ain't going to keep my family fed through winter. He reached for her arm. Come on now, don't fight. Eliza drove the knife toward his hand. She was weak, dehydrated, half delirious, but desperation gave her speed. The blade caught Jake across the knuckles, drawing blood. He jerked back with a curse. And in that moment of surprise, Eliza rolled to her feet and ran. She made it 15 feet before one of the other men tackled her from horseback. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and dust. Eliza's knife went flying. She screamed, clawed, bit, caught the man's thumb between her teeth, and bit down until she tasted blood. He howled and backhanded her across the face. Stars exploded behind her eyes. Little bitch broke skin. The man clutched his bleeding hand. Jake, you said she'd come quiet. I said no such thing. Jake dismounted, wrapping a bandana around his bleeding knuckles. He looked down at Eliza, who was trying to crawl away on her hands and knees. She's got spirit. I'll give her that. Dalton might like that. Or it might get her killed faster. Please, Eliza's voice broke. Blood ran from her nose where she'd been hit, mixing with the dust on her face. Please don't do this. I'm begging you. Jake picked up her knife, studied it, then tossed it into the brush. He grabbed Eliza by the arm and hauled her to her feet. She fought. God, she fought. But her body had nothing left. She was a rag doll in his grip. Tie her, Jake told his men, and get some water in her. Dalton wants her alive. They bound her wrists with rough rope that bit into her skin. One of them pressed a canteen to her lips, and she drank greedily, desperately, water spilling down her chin. When they pulled it away, she actually whimpered. That's enough, Jake said. We got a long ride back. They threw her onto a horse, not gently, and tied her bound wrist to the saddle horn. Jake mounted behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her from falling. The other men took positions on either side. As they turned their horses south back toward her stepfather's ranch and Marcus Dalton's waiting hands, Eliza felt something inside her break. Not her spirit. That was still there, still burning like a coal in her chest. But something else, some last illusion of fairness or justice or mercy in the world. She'd tried. She'd stolen a dying horse and ridden into the desert and fought with every ounce of strength she had. And it hadn't been enough. It would never be enough. The world didn't care about her courage or her will to live. The world just kept turning crushing people like her under its weight. I'm going to kill him. She whispered so quiet that Jake probably didn't hear. If I get the chance, I'm going to kill Marcus Dalton. Jake's arm tightened around her waist, but he didn't respond. They rode south as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. 4 riders and a girl who had learned that in this world freedom wasn't given. It was only ever borrowed, and always at a price higher than anyone should have to pay. The ride back took 3 hours. 3 hours of heat and dust and the rope cutting into Eliza's wrists. 3 hours of Jake Morrison's silent presence behind her, his arm around her waist, keeping her upright when exhaustion made her sway. 3 hours of thinking about Marcus Dalton's dead eyes and dead walls and the small ranch 30 miles south where she would disappear just like they had. The sun was touching the horizon when they finally reached her stepfather's property. The ranch house looked exactly as it had that morning. Weathered wood, sagging porch, chickens scratching in the dirt. But to Eliza, it looked like the gates of hell. Marcus Dalton was waiting on the porch. He stood as they rode up, a thick-bodied man in expensive clothes that didn't quite fit his frame. His hair was gray at the temples, his face tanned and lined from years in the sun. And his eyes. Those flat, emotionless eyes tracked Eliza like a snake watching a mouse. Found her in the Badlands, Jake said, dismounting. He reached up to untie Eliza's wrist from the saddle horn. She put up a fight. I can see that. Dalton's gaze moved over Eliza's torn dress, her bloody nose, the bruise forming on her cheek. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Good, I like them with spirit. They break more satisfyingly. Eliza's stepfather appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on his pants. Thank Christ. I thought maybe the desert took her. Desert tried. Jake pulled Eliza down from the horse, steadying her when her legs almost gave out. But she's tougher than she looks. She always was stubborn. Her stepfather descended the porch steps, counting out bills. Here's your pay, Morrison, plus extra for the trouble. Jake took the money without comment, but as he turned to leave, his eyes met Eliza's for just a moment. She saw the apology there, the shame, the resignation of a man who'd sold his conscience for his family's survival. She didn't forgive him. Well then, Marcus Dalton said, walking down the steps. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who'd never had to hurry for anything in his life. Let's have a look at my purchase. He reached for Eliza's chin, tilting her face up to the dying light. His fingers were soft, uncalloused, but they gripped with iron strength. Eliza held very still, her heart hammering every instinct, screaming at her to pull away. But she'd seen what happened to women who showed fear to men like Dalton. It excited them, made them cruel. So she met his eyes instead, stared right back at him with all the hatred burning in her chest. Dalton smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd broken women before and would break her too. Still got that fire, he murmured. Good. My last wife lost hers too quickly. Barely made it 6 months before she... He waved a hand vaguely. Well, no point dwelling on the past. She didn't lose it. Eliza heard herself say, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. You beat it out of her. Her stepfather's hand cracked across her face before Dalton could respond. Eliza's head snapped to the side, her ear ringing. You watch your mouth, girl, her stepfather snarled. Mr. Dalton's your husband now. You show respect. Husband? Eliza laughed, and it sounded half mad even to her own ears. You need a ceremony for a husband. This is just ownership. You sold me like a cow. Dalton chuckled, actually chuckled. Smart too. My. I really did get my money's worth. He released her chin and turned to her stepfather. The papers are in order, fully legal. Signed and witnessed. Property transfer, not a marriage contract. Cleaner that way. No questions about inheritance or rights. Eliza felt the words like a physical blow. Property transfer. They'd literally sold her like livestock. Perfect. Dalton gestured to his men who'd been waiting by their horses. Get her loaded up. We ride tonight. Tonight, her stepfather frowned. It's near dark. The desert's cooler, and besides, Dalton's smile widened as he looked at Eliza. I'm eager to get my new property home. Two of Dalton's men stepped forward. Unlike Jake Morrison, these men had no sympathy in their eyes. They were hired muscle, the kind who hurt people for pay and slept soundly afterward. One of them grabbed Eliza's arm, the same arm already bruised from the day's violence, and she couldn't stop the gasp of pain that escaped. Wait! She heard herself say the word coming out, desperate, panicked. Please wait. I need to get my things. My mother's Bible. Her locket. You don't need nothing, the man holding her said flatly. Mr. Dalton provides everything his women need. Please, oh. She looked at her stepfather, hating herself for begging, but unable to stop. Just 5 minutes. Just let me say goodbye to the house. To Mama's things. Her stepfather's face hardened. Your mama's dead, and whatever she left ain't yours no more. You're Dalton's property now. You don't own nothing. Load her up, Dalton said, bored with the conversation, and gag her if she keeps talking. I don't want to listen to crying all the way home. They dragged her toward the horses. Eliza's mind raced, searching desperately for options, for anything that might give her another chance. But there was nothing. 4 armed men, her hands still bound, the desert darkening around them. There was no escape this time. They lifted her onto a horse, not her own this time, but a tall gelding that danced nervously under the weight of a rider who couldn't control it. One of Dalton's men mounted behind her, his arms caging her in. She could smell whiskey on his breath, sweat and leather and violence. Try anything, he whispered in her ear, and I'll make you regret it long before we reach the ranch. Marcus Dalton swung onto his own horse, a massive black stallion that probably cost more than Eliza's entire life. He looked at her stepfather and tipped his hat. Pleasure doing business with you. Likewise. And if she gives you trouble, oh, I know how to handle troublesome women. Dalton's smile was all teeth. It's my specialty. They rode out as the last light bled from the sky, 6 riders moving south into the gathering darkness. Eliza twisted in the saddle, watching her stepfather's ranch disappear behind them, and felt the last thread of hope snap inside her chest. She'd tried to run. She'd failed. Now she was heading to a place where women went and never came back, bought and paid for by a man who smiled when he talked about breaking spirits. Behind her lay a stepfather who'd sold her without a second thought. Around her rode men who saw her as cargo, not a person. And ahead, somewhere in the darkness, ahead was Marcus Dalton's ranch, where 3 wives were buried in unmarked graves, where a 4th would join them soon enough. The stars came out one by one, cold and distant and uncaring. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust and the promise of another scorching day tomorrow. The horses moved at a steady walk, their hoofbeats rhythmic and hypnotic. Eliza closed her eyes and thought about her mother, about the stories she used to tell, about brave women in old ballads who fought against impossible odds. Her mother had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing to fight even when fear told you to give up. I'm not giving up, Eliza thought fiercely. I'm not. They can tie my hands and drag me across the desert and call me property, but I'm not giving up. I'll find another chance. I'll wait and watch, and when they make a mistake, when they drop their guard for just 1 second, I'll run again. And next time, I'll make sure I have a better horse. The thought was so absurd, so darkly funny given her circumstances, that she actually felt her lips twitch in something like a smile. The man behind her felt it, and his arms tightened warningly. Something amusing? He asked, his voice low and threatening. No, Eliza said, but inside, in the secret place where her spirit still burned, she was laughing, because they might have caught her, might have bound her, might think they owned her, but they didn't understand what they'd bought. They didn't know that every woman in her family had been stubborn to the point of madness, that her grandmother had once shot a man who tried to take her land, that her mother had survived 5 years alone in the wilderness after her first husband died. Eliza's heart came from women who didn't break. They bent, they survived, they waited for their moment, and then they fought back twice as hard. So she rode south through the darkness, hands bound and body bruised, toward a ranch that was supposed to be her grave. And she plotted, she planned. She memorized every turn, every landmark, every detail that might help her when she ran again. Because she would run again. The desert had failed to kill her. Marcus Dalton would too. She just had to survive long enough to prove it. They rode for 4 hours into the darkness before Marcus Dalton finally called a halt. The desert night had turned cold, the temperature dropping 40 degrees from the day's brutal heat. Eliza was shivering in her torn dress despite the warmth of the horse beneath her and the man pressed against her back. We'll camp here, Dalton announced, dismounting in a clearing surrounded by tall saguaro cacti that stood like silent sentinels in the starlight. Phillips, get a fire going. Monroe, check the horses. And someone get that girl down before she falls off and breaks something I paid good money for. The man behind Eliza Phillips apparently dismounted and pulled her roughly from the saddle. Her legs buckled the moment her feet hit the ground, numb from hours of riding. She would have fallen if Phillips hadn't caught her arm, his grip bruising. Careful with the merchandise, Dalton said mildly, but there was amusement in his voice. He was enjoying this, enjoying her helplessness, her fear, the absolute control he had over every aspect of her existence. They tied her to a Joshua tree at the edge of the camp, rope circling her waist and binding her to the trunk. Her hands remained bound in front of her. When she tried to work her fingers testing the knots, Phillips backhanded her casually. Don't. Eliza tasted blood again. She was starting to wonder if she'd ever taste anything else. The men made camp with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. A fire sprang up, quickly fed with dried mesquite and creosote wood. They laid out bedrolls, checked weapons, passed around jerky and hardtack. No one offered Eliza anything. She watched them eat and tried not to think about how long it had been since she'd had food. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago and moved into a tight, painful knot. Marcus Dalton settled himself near the fire, his bulk making the ground seem to sag beneath him. He pulled out a cigar, lit it with a burning twig, and studied Eliza through the smoke. You know what I like about the desert? He asked conversationally, as if they were old friends sharing a pleasant evening. It's honest out here. There's no pretense. The strong survive. the weak die, and everything in between is just noise. Eliza said nothing. She'd learned in the last 12 hours that sometimes silence was the only weapon she had left. Your stepfather tells me you can read and write, Dalton continued, that your mama was a school teacher before she married him. That true. Still, Eliza remained silent. Answer Mr. Dalton when he talks to you. Phillips growled, taking a step toward her. It's fine. Dalton waved him back. She's scared. First night away from home, tied to a tree, surrounded by strange men. I'd be quiet too. He drew on his cigar, the tip glowing red in the darkness. But here's something you need to understand, girl. Silence only works if the person you're being silent to cares about your opinion. I don't. I own you. Legal and binding. So whether you talk or stay quiet, answer or ignore me, it makes no difference to how this ends. Then why bother talking to me at all? The words escaped before Eliza could stop them. Her voice was raw from thirst and screaming, but it still held an edge of defiance. Dalton smiled. There she is. I was starting to worry the desert had broken you already. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I talk to you because I'm curious. See my last 3 wives, they were quiet girls. Obedient, scared from the start. And you know what? They were boring. Died boring too. Whimpering and praying and acting like I was the worst thing that ever happened to them. You were, Eliza said flatly. Maybe. But my point is, you're different. You stole a half-dead horse and rode into the desert rather than marry me. You cut Jake Morrison, and Jake's a hard man to cut. You looked me in the eye when most women won't even look at my boots. That's interesting. That's worth $400. I'm not interested in being interesting to you. Good thing it doesn't matter what you're interested in. Dalton stood stretched and walked toward her. Eliza pressed herself back against the tree trunk, but there was nowhere to go. He stopped a foot away, close enough that she could smell the cigar smoke on his breath. Here's how this works. We reach my ranch tomorrow evening. You'll be given a room, locked from the outside naturally. You'll be fed, clothed, kept comfortable, and in return, you'll do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, without question or complaint. And if I refuse, then you'll be taught not to refuse. His hand came up, not striking her, but touching her cheek where the bruise was already forming. His fingers were gentle, almost tender, which somehow made it worse. I've broken dozens of horses in my time. Wild ones, mean ones, stubborn ones. They all break eventually. Some take longer than others, but they all break. You understand what I'm telling you? Eliza met his eyes. I understand you've killed 3 women and you're planning to kill me too. Something flickered across Dalton's face. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? They weren't murdered, if that's what you're implying. One died in childbirth, one caught pneumonia, one, he paused, considering. One had an accident with the stairs. How convenient. Isn't it? He dropped his hand and stepped back. Get some sleep, girl. Tomorrow's another long ride, and I want you alive and mostly undamaged when we arrive. He returned to the fire, and the conversation among the men turned to other things. Water rights, cattle prices, some dispute with a neighboring ranch. Eliza stopped listening. She was too busy working at the ropes around her wrists, trying to find any give in the knots. There was none. Whoever had tied her knew their business. The night grew colder. The fire burned low. One by one, the men rolled into their bedrolls until only one remained awake to keep watch. Monroe, a lean man with a scar across his throat and eyes that never seemed to blink. He sat with his back to a rock, his rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness beyond the fire's light. Eliza's head nodded forward. She jerked it back up, determined to stay awake to watch for any opportunity. But exhaustion was a weight pressing down on her, and the day's violence had taken everything she had. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts. She dreamed of her mother, of the house they'd lived in before her mother married that bastard stepfather. When it was just the two of them and life was hard but honest. Her mother was teaching her to read her finger-tracing words in an old Bible, her voice patient and warm. But the words kept changing. Eliza squinted at the page, trying to make sense of them. Remember, Eliza, her mother said, looking up with eyes that held all the love in the world. The Apache taught me this. When you're lost in the desert, look for the 3 sisters. 3 sisters. Mesquite, Palo Verde, Ironwood. They grow near water. Always. Her mother's finger traced a map that appeared on the Bible's pages, trails Eliza had never seen before, shortcuts through canyons, water caches hidden in rock formations. "You'll need these," her mother whispered, "when you run again. And you will run again, baby. You're my daughter. We don't give up." The dream shifted. Now her mother was crying, her hands on her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I left you alone with him. I tried to stay. I tried." "Mama." A sound woke her. Eliza's eyes snapped open to find the sky beginning to lighten in the east. That pre-dawn gray that came before sunrise. The fire had burned to embers. The men were still asleep, including Monroe, who'd apparently decided his watch could end early. And there, standing at the edge of the camp, was a figure. Eliza blinked, certain she was still dreaming. The figure was tall, lean, dressed in dark clothes that blended with the shadows. A man, she thought, though in the dim light it was hard to be sure. He stood perfectly still, watching the sleeping camp, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Their eyes met across the distance. Even in the darkness, Eliza could feel the weight of his gaze. She opened her mouth to scream, to warn the men to do something. But the stranger raised one finger to his lips, the universal gesture for silence. Then he melted back into the desert-like smoke, and Eliza was left wondering if she'd seen anything at all. The camp stirred as the sun broke the horizon. Phillips kicked Monroe awake, cursing him for sleeping on watch. Monroe swore he'd only close his eyes for a minute. Dalton emerged from his bedroll with a grunt and immediately called for coffee. The smell of it, when Phillips got it brewing, made Eliza's stomach twist with hunger and longing. They broke camp quickly. Dalton walked over to where Eliza was tied, studying her with the same expression a man might use when inspecting livestock. "You look terrible," he said cheerfully. "Good thing I like a project." He cut the rope binding her to the tree, but left her wrists tied. "We'll ride hard today. I want to be home before dark. Try to keep up. Don't slow us down." "I'd rather stay here." "That wasn't a request." His voice hardened. "You can come willingly, or I can have my men carry you. Your choice." Eliza looked past him at Phillips and Monroe, at their flat, indifferent eyes. She thought about the stranger on the ridge, about her mother's words in the dream. "The only person who can make you a prisoner is yourself." She wasn't beaten yet, and if she went with them, maybe she'd see something, learn something, find some weakness she could exploit. "I'll come." Dalton smiled and offered his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to dinner. Eliza took it because she had no choice. They mounted up and continued southeast as the sun climbed. The temperature rose degree by brutal degree. Eliza's head throbbed. Her lips cracked and bled. When they finally stopped at midday to water the horses, Phillips gave her half a canteen of warm metallic water and a piece of jerky so hard it nearly broke her teeth. She ate it anyway, forcing down every bite. That was when she saw him again, the stranger. He was on a ridge, maybe a quarter-mile north, sitting on a gray horse, watching their group with the stillness of a predator. This time, Dalton's men saw him too. "We got company," Monroe said, his hand moving to his rifle. Dalton shaded his eyes, squinting at the distant figure. "Who is that?" "Can't tell from here. Want me to ride up and ask his business?" "No." Dalton's voice was sharp. "We don't have time for distractions. He's probably just a drifter. Ignore him." But as they mounted up and continued south, Eliza noticed Dalton kept glancing back over his shoulder, and the stranger kept pace with them, always staying just out of rifle range, always watching. By mid-afternoon, the stranger had moved closer, close enough that Eliza could make out details. The wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, the rifle across his saddle, the way he sat his horse like he'd been born on it. There was something in his posture, something in the patient way he followed that made her think of wolves tracking prey. "That's it," Phillips snarled. "I'm going to go run that son of a bitch off." "You'll do no such thing," Dalton snapped. "We're 3 hours from my property. Once we cross onto my land, he won't dare follow. And if he does, then we'll deal with him there, where I've got 20 men and all the time in the world." Dalton kicked his horse into a faster pace. "Come on, I want to be home." They rode hard, pushing the horses, and the stranger kept pace. Eliza found herself twisting in the saddle, trying to get a better look at him. Who was he? What did he want? Was he following them specifically, or was he just traveling in the same direction? And why did part of her hope he was following them? The sun was touching the western horizon when they finally reached Dalton's land. Eliza knew they'd crossed onto his property because everything changed. Fences appeared well-maintained and strong. Cattle grazed in protected valleys. A water tower rose in the distance. This wasn't some struggling ranch scraping by. This was money, power, resources. Dalton's ranch house appeared as they crested a final hill. It was bigger than Eliza had imagined. A sprawling structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and actual glass windows. Outbuildings dotted the landscape: barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, corral. Men moved around doing end-of-day chores, at least a dozen that Eliza could see. "Home sweet home," Dalton said, satisfaction thick in his voice. "What do you think, girl, better than that hovel your stepfather kept, isn't it?" Eliza didn't answer. She was looking back the way they'd come, searching the horizon for the stranger. He was there, stopped on the ridge that marked the property line, still watching. "Who are you?" she thought desperately. "Why are you following us?" As if he'd heard her thoughts, the stranger turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Eliza felt something inside her break a little more. For a few hours, she'd had this strange, irrational hope that maybe the stranger was coming to help her, that maybe he was some wandering hero from the stories her mother used to tell. But no, he was just a drifter who'd happened to be traveling the same direction. Now he was gone, and she was here, and there was no one coming to save her. She'd have to save herself. They rode into the ranch yard as the last light bled from the sky. Men stopped their work to stare as Dalton dismounted. Eliza saw curiosity in some faces, pity in others, and a kind of knowing resignation in most. They'd seen this before. However many wives Dalton had really had, 3 or more, these men had watched them arrive and watched them disappear. "Peters," Dalton called out. An older man with gray hair and a weathered face approached. "Get the upstairs room ready. Fresh linens, lock on the outside of the door, bar the windows. Our new guest will be staying for a while." "Yes, sir, Mr. Dalton." "And send someone to fetch Dr. Miller. I want her checked over. Make sure she's healthy enough for—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Every man there knew what he meant. Phillips pulled Eliza down from the horse. Her legs gave out completely this time, and she collapsed in the dust. Rough hands hauled her upright. Someone laughed, not kindly. "Get her inside," Dalton ordered. "Clean her up, feed her. I want her presentable by tomorrow night." They dragged her toward the house. Eliza tried to walk, tried to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body wasn't cooperating. She stumbled up the porch steps through a doorway into a large room lit by oil lamps. She had an impression of expensive furniture. Animal heads mounted on walls. A stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Then she was being hauled up a staircase down a hallway into a room at the end. Peters was there already, laying out blankets on a bed. The windows were indeed barred. Iron rods bolted into the frames. The door was heavy wood with a new lock that gleamed in the lamplight. "Bath's being drawn," Peters said without looking at her. "Food will be up in 20 minutes. Don't try anything stupid. The drop from that window would kill you, and Mr. Dalton's men patrol all night." They cut the ropes on her wrists and shoved her further into the room. The door slammed shut behind her. She heard the lock turn. Heavy and final. Eliza stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly, and tried to process what had just happened. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been at her stepfather's ranch. Now she was here, locked in a room in Marcus Dalton's house. And tomorrow night, he'd said she needed to be presentable. She knew what that meant. A knock on the door made her jump. It opened a crack and a young Mexican woman slipped inside carrying a copper tub. She was followed by 2 more women carrying buckets of steaming water. They filled the tub without speaking, not meeting Eliza's eyes. "Please," Eliza said to them, "please, you have to help me. You have to." "No," the first woman said quietly. Her eyes said otherwise, but her voice was firm. She set down soap and a towel next to the tub. "Báñese, coma, duerma." Bathe, eat, sleep, universal commands that needed no translation. The women left. The door locked again. Eliza stared at the tub of hot water and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since morning. She'd been determined not to cry, had held it together through capture and violence and fear. But somehow the simple kindness of hot water broke something in her. She stripped off her ruined dress and lowered herself into the tub. The water was almost too hot, scalding her sunburned skin, but it felt like heaven. She scrubbed at the dirt and blood, watching the water turn brown around her. Her body was a map of bruises, purple on her arms where men had grabbed her, blue-black on her cheek where she'd been struck, yellow-green on her ribs where she'd fallen from Sadie. Sadie, the old mare who tried so hard and failed. Eliza wondered if she was still alive lying in the desert or if Jake Morrison had put her down mercifully. She hoped for the latter. Nothing deserved to die slowly under that sun. The food arrived as promised: bread, cheese, cold chicken, water, actual food, not the hardtack and jerky from the trail. Eliza ate mechanically, forcing down every bite. She needed strength. Whatever was coming tomorrow, she'd need every ounce of strength she could gather. As night fell completely, Eliza went to the barred window and looked out over Dalton's land. In the distance, she could see the glow of fires from the bunkhouse, could hear the faint sound of men's voices, someone playing a harmonica. The sky was full of stars. So many they seemed to blend together into rivers of light. Somewhere out there was the stranger who'd followed them. Somewhere out there was the desert that had almost killed her. Somewhere out there was freedom if she could just find a way to reach it. But between her and freedom stood locked doors, armed men, and Marcus Dalton's absolute belief that he owned her. Eliza pressed her forehead against the cool iron bars and whispered to the night, "I'm not going to die here. I'm not going to be wife number 4 in an unmarked grave. I'll find a way out, I swear it." The stars didn't answer. They never did. She fell asleep on the bed, still damp from her bath, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. And she dreamed, not of her mother this time, but of the stranger on the ridge. In her dream, he turned his horse and rode away just as he had in reality. But then he stopped, looked back, and instead of continuing on, he turned around and rode toward her, his face still hidden by his hat, but his intention clear. He was coming back. When Eliza woke in the gray light of dawn, she knew it had just been a dream born of desperation. The stranger was long gone, and she was on her own. But then 3 hours after sunrise, as she sat by the barred window watching the ranch wake up, she saw movement on the northern ridge. A lone rider on a gray horse, sitting motionless, watching the ranch house. He'd come back. Eliza's heart began to pound. She pressed closer to the window, trying to see better, but the distance was too great. She couldn't make out his face, couldn't tell if he was even the same man. But something in her gut, some instinct she'd learned to trust during yesterday's nightmare in the desert, told her it was him. He sat there for maybe 10 minutes, long enough that some of Dalton's men noticed him too. She heard shouting from below, saw men pointing. One of them started toward the barn, probably to get a rifle or a horse. The stranger turned and disappeared over the ridge. "Who is he?" Eliza whispered to the empty room. "What does he want?" She didn't know, but for the first time since Jake Morrison had caught her in the desert, Eliza felt something other than fear or despair. She felt curiosity, hope even, though she tried to squash it down because hope was dangerous. Hope got you killed, but she couldn't quite kill it. Not when there was a stranger on a ridge who kept coming back, kept watching, kept hovering at the edges like he was waiting for something, or planning something. The day crawled past. Peters brought her lunch, more bread, some kind of stew. The doctor came, an older man with kind eyes who examined her roughly but not cruelly, checking her injuries, making sure nothing was broken. He said nothing beyond professional observations, wouldn't meet her eyes, left as quickly as he'd come. As the sun began to set, the young Mexican woman returned. She brought a dress. Not Eliza's torn one, but a new dress in deep green with actual buttons and a proper corset. There were shoes, too, and a brush for her hair. "Para esta noche," the woman said softly, "for tonight." Eliza's stomach turned to ice. Tonight, Dalton had said she needed to be presentable by tonight, which meant tonight he'd know. She couldn't think about it. If she thought about it, she'd break. Instead, she put on the dress, let the woman brush her hair until it shone copper in the lamplight, stood still while the corset was laced and the shoes fitted. And all the while her mind raced, searching desperately for any possible escape route. The window was barred and 3 stories up. The door was locked from outside. There would be men everywhere. Even if she somehow got out of the room, she'd never make it off the property. Unless, unless the stranger came back. It was a foolish thought, a desperate thought, but it was all she had. As full dark fell and the woman left her alone again, Eliza heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, men's voices, the lock turning. The door opened and Marcus Dalton stood there dressed in a clean suit, his hair slicked back. He looked her up and down with approval. "Much better," he said. "You clean up nice. Almost pretty if you ignore the bruises." He stepped into the room. Behind him, Eliza could see Phillips and Monroe in the hallway standing guard. "Come on downstairs. I had the cook make something special. We should celebrate your arrival properly." "I'd rather stay here." "That wasn't a request." His voice hardened. "You can come willingly, or I can have my men carry you. Your choice." Eliza looked past him at Phillips and Monroe, at their flat, indifferent eyes. She thought about the stranger on the ridge, about her mother's words in the dream, "The only person who can make you a prisoner is yourself." She wasn't beaten yet, and if she went downstairs, maybe she'd see something, learn something, find some weakness she could exploit. "I'll come." Dalton smiled and offered his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to dinner. Eliza took it because she had no choice, and together they descended the stairs, into whatever hell awaited her next. But as they walked, she made herself another promise. This wasn't over. The stranger had come back once, twice. If he came back a third time, she'd find a way to signal him. And if he didn't come back, she'd find another way. Because she was Eliza Hart, and she'd rather die fighting than live as Marcus Dalton's property for even one more day. The dining room was larger than Eliza's entire childhood home had been. A long table dominated the center, set with china and silver that gleamed in the light from a chandelier hanging overhead. Real crystal that caught and scattered the lamplight into tiny rainbows. Eliza had never seen anything like it outside of pictures in her mother's old magazines. Marcus Dalton pulled out a chair for her with exaggerated courtesy, then seated himself at the head of the table. A young Mexican girl appeared with covered dishes. Roasted meat, potatoes swimming in butter, vegetables Eliza couldn't identify. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger despite the fear coating her throat. "Eat," Dalton said, cutting into his steak. "You look half-starved." Eliza picked up her fork with shaking hands. The food tasted like ashes in her mouth, but she forced it down. She needed strength. Whatever happened tonight, she'd need every advantage she could get. "You're probably wondering what happens next," Dalton said conversationally as if they were discussing the weather. "Let me lay it out for you clearly so there's no confusion." He took a sip of wine. "You belong to me now. Legal binding documented. You'll live in this house. Eat food I provide. Wear clothes I buy. In return, you'll fulfill certain duties. Wifely duties, though we both know this isn't a real marriage." "Then what is it?" "Ownership." He said it simply, without shame or hesitation. "I collect things you see, fine horses, quality cattle, beautiful objects, and women who would otherwise be wasted on poor men or left to rot as spinsters. I give them comfort, security, a place in the world. Your last 3 wives are dead. Everyone dies eventually." Dalton took another bite of steak. "At least they died in comfort. Better than dying in childbirth in some dirt floor shack, or working themselves to death at 25 like most ranch women. I gave them years they wouldn't have had otherwise." The casual cruelty of it made Eliza's blood run cold. This was a man who'd convinced himself his actions were justified, even noble, which meant he had no conscience left to appeal to. "I won't do it," she heard herself say. "Whatever you're expecting, I won't." The backhand came so fast she didn't see it. One moment she was speaking, the next she was on the floor, her chair knocked over, her mouth filling with blood. Pain exploded across her face where his ring had caught her cheekbone. Dalton stood over her, his expression barely changed. "Let's establish something right now. You don't tell me no. You don't refuse me anything." The last woman who tried that ended up with a broken arm and 3 shattered teeth. She learned. Eventually. He reached down and hauled Eliza to her feet by her hair, ignoring her cry of pain. "You seem like a smart girl, smarter than the others, so let me be very clear. Resistance will be met with pain. Obedience will be rewarded. Choose wisely." He released her and Eliza stumbled back against the table. her scalp burning, tears streaming down her face from pure physical pain. She wanted to spit blood at him, wanted to grab the steak knife and drive it into his throat, wanted to scream until her voice gave out. Instead, she said nothing. Because what could she say? He held all the power here, and they both knew it. Sit down. Dalton returned to his own chair. Finish your dinner. Eliza righted her chair with trembling hands and sat. She couldn't taste the food anymore through the blood in her mouth, but she ate mechanically, her mind racing. The knife. There was a knife right there within reach. If she was fast enough, don't even think about it. Dalton said, watching her eyes. You'd be dead before you got 2 steps. Phillips is right outside that door, and he's faster than you'd believe. He paused. Besides, you don't have the killer instinct. I can tell. You're a fighter, but you're not a killer. Not yet, anyway. He was right, and Eliza hated him for it. She'd never hurt anyone in her life beyond that desperate slash at Jake Morrison's hand. The thought of actually driving a knife into human flesh made her stomach turn. Dalton finished his meal in silence, watching her with the patience of a cat with a cornered mouse. When the plates were cleared away by the silent Mexican girl, he stood and held out his hand. Come with me. This was it. Whatever was going to happen, it was happening now. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked at his outstretched hand and thought about refusing, about fighting, about dying right here rather than going with him. Then she thought about the stranger on the ridge, about the promise she'd made herself, about staying alive long enough to find one chance, just one chance. She stood ignoring his hand and followed him from the dining room. He led her through the house, past the main room, with its mounted animal heads, up the stairs down the hallway toward her locked room. But he didn't stop there. He continued to the end of the hall, to a larger door with ornate carvings, his private chambers. Eliza's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Her vision narrowed. This was happening too fast. She wasn't ready. She needed more time to think, to plan. Dalton opened the door and gestured her inside. The room was massive, dominated by a 4-poster bed with red curtains, more expensive furniture, more signs of wealth. A window overlooking the ranch unbarred because no one would dare try to escape from Marcus Dalton's private room. Wait here, Dalton said. I need to speak with my foreman about tomorrow's work. Don't try the window. It's a 40-foot drop onto rocks, and the door will be guarded. I'll return shortly. He left, closing the door behind him. Eliza heard the lock turn. She stood frozen for a long moment, her mind blank with terror. Then training kicked in. Her mother's voice, her grandmother's stories, every lesson about survival she'd ever learned. Move, think, find options. The window. She ran to it, looking down. Dalton was right. It was a fatal drop onto jagged rocks. But maybe if she tore the bed sheets into strips, tied them together. A sound outside made her freeze. Not from the direction of the door, from beyond the window. She peered into the darkness and saw movement in the shadows near the barn. A figure barely visible in the starlight leading a horse. The stranger. Eliza's heart leaped. He was here. He'd come onto the property. But why? What was he planning? As if he had felt her watching, the figure looked up. Even across the distance, even in the darkness, Eliza felt their eyes meet. The stranger raised one hand, not waving, just acknowledging her presence. Then he moved deeper into the shadows and disappeared. He was waiting. But for what? Eliza's mind raced. If she could somehow get out of this room, if she could make it to the ground floor, if she could reach the barn. It was 1,000 ifs, each one more impossible than the last. But it was something, a thread of possibility where before there had been only despair. She turned from the window and surveyed the room more carefully. The door was locked and guarded. The window was too high. But there was a washstand with a heavy ceramic pitcher, a fireplace poker, a chair that could be broken into pieces, improvised weapons if she was brave enough to use them. Footsteps in the hallway, Dalton returning. Eliza grabbed the fireplace poker, weighing it in her hands. It was solid iron, heavy enough to do damage if she swung hard. She positioned herself behind the door, raising the poker above her head. The lock turned. The door opened. Marcus Dalton stepped through, and Eliza swung with everything she had. The poker caught him across the shoulder instead of his head. He turned at the last second, some instinct warning him, and her killing blow became merely painful. Dalton roared in pain and rage, stumbling forward. Eliza raised the poker for another swing, but he was faster than his bulk suggested. His hands shot out and caught her wrists, squeezing until bones ground together and she gasped, the poker clattering to the floor. "You little bitch." He snarled, his face inches from hers. "I was going to be gentle, make it easy for you, but now—" The explosion of gunfire cut him off. Not close. Somewhere outside near the barn. Multiple shots in rapid succession. Men shouting, horses screaming. Dalton's head snapped toward the window, his grip on Eliza's wrist loosening fractionally. She drove her knee into his groin with everything she had. Dalton folded with a sound that was half grunt, half wheeze. Eliza tore free of his grip and ran for the door. Phillips was there, torn between guarding the room and responding to the gunfire outside. That moment of hesitation cost him. Eliza slammed into him full force, catching him off balance, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs. "Boss," Phillips, Ritu shouted, trying to grab her. "Boss, she's—" Eliza's elbow caught him in the throat, more by luck than skill. He gagged, his grip weakening, and she scrambled free. Her feet pounded down the hallway toward the stairs, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Behind her, she heard Dalton bellowing for his men, heard Phillips choking and cursing. More gunfire. Closer now. The front door of the house exploded inward with a crash that shook the walls. Eliza reached the top of the stairs and stopped, frozen by what she saw below. The stranger stood in the shattered doorway, a rifle in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. He was tall, taller than she'd realized, with a lean, hard face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. His eyes, when they met hers, were gray as winter storms. "Move," he said. One word, low and urgent. Eliza moved. She flew down the stairs, nearly falling in her haste, the green dress tangling around her legs. The stranger stepped aside to let her pass, then turned back to the hallway, his rifle tracking far for targets. "Back door," he said. "Through the kitchen. Horses is waiting. Who are you later? Run." She ran, through the main room, into a kitchen she'd never seen before, past a terrified cook who pressed herself against the wall. The back door was already open. Beyond it in the yard, chaos reigned. Dalton's men were running in all directions, some toward the gunfire near the barn, others toward the house. In the confusion of darkness and shouting, nobody seemed to notice one woman in a green dress slipping out into the night. A gray horse stood tied to a post near the kitchen door. Saddled and ready, the stranger's horse. Had to be. But the stranger was still inside the house, still covering her escape. Eliza hesitated, her hand on the saddle, torn between self-preservation and something she couldn't quite name. The stranger burst through the door, moving fast. Blood stained his left sleeve black in the starlight. "You're hurt," Eliza said stupidly. "I'll live. Mount up now." She swung into the saddle, her muscles screaming from 2 days of riding and violence. The stranger cut the rope and grabbed the horse's mane, pulling himself up behind her in one smooth motion. His arms came around her to grab the reins, and then they were moving, the horse leaping forward into a gallop. Shouts behind them. More gunfire, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Something whined past Eliza's ear. A bullet, she realized with detached horror. And then they were around the corner of the barn, using the building as cover. "Head down," the stranger said in her ear, his voice perfectly calm despite the chaos. "Stay low." He guided the horse with his knees, leaving his hands free to handle the rifle. They burst past the barn and into open ground, and Eliza saw what he'd done. 3 buildings were burning. A storage shed, part of the bunkhouse, a hay barn. The fires drew men like moths. And in the confusion and the smoke and darkness and panic, 1 horse and 2 riders disappeared into the desert night. They rode hard for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sound of pursuit faded behind them, swallowed by distance and darkness. Finally, when Eliza thought she might fall from the saddle out of pure exhaustion, the stranger slowed the horse to a walk. "There's an arroyo 2 miles north," he said. "We'll rest there, tend wounds, then keep moving. Dalton will come after you with everything he has. We need distance." "Why did you do this?" Eliza's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me?" "Tell you later. Stay conscious. I need you able to ride." "I don't even know your name." "Caleb Ross." A pause. "And you're Eliza Hart, property of Marcus Dalton, according to papers filed in Tucson last week." He said the word property like it tasted foul. Except now you're not his property anymore. Now you're a fugitive. Same as me. Fugitive from what? That Caleb said is a much longer story. One I'll tell you when we're not being hunted. They rode in silence after that, the horse's steady gait eating up ground beneath the stars. Eliza's mind spun with questions, with fear, with an exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. But underneath it all was something else, something bright and fierce and utterly unexpected. Hope. She'd escaped. Against impossible odds, against every piece of logic and reason she'd escaped. And this stranger Caleb Ross had risked his life to make it possible. The arroyo appeared as a dark slash in the landscape, a dry riverbed cutting through the desert floor. Caleb guided the horse down the steep bank, and they stopped in the shadow of an overhang. He dismounted first, then helped Eliza down. Her legs buckled immediately, and he caught her steadying her against the horse's flank. "Easy," he said. "You've been through hell. Take a minute. Your arm." Eliza managed seeing the blood more clearly now. "You're bleeding. Flesh wound. I've had worse." He pulled a canteen from the saddle and handed it to her. "Drink, not too much at once." The water was cold and clean, and the most wonderful thing Eliza had ever tasted. She forced herself to stop after a few swallows, handing it back. Caleb drank sparingly, his eyes never stopping their scan of the surrounding darkness. "How did you know?" Eliza asked. "About me, I mean. About what Dalton was doing." Caleb was silent for a long moment, tending to his horse, checking the saddle, making small adjustments with the ease of long practice. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "I didn't, at first. I saw a group of men traveling with a woman who was so tied up. That made me curious. Followed to see what the situation was." He paused, his jaw tightening. "When you arrived at Dalton's ranch, I did some asking around in the nearest town. Found out about his wives, about the property transfers, about young women who arrived at his place and never left. So you decided to rescue a stranger." "I decided to stop a predator." His voice went flat. "I've seen men like Dalton before. Hell, I've worked for men like Dalton before. They don't stop unless someone stops them. You burned his buildings. Distraction, needed to divide his forces, make them think about protecting property instead of chasing us. By the time they get those fires under control and realize it was a diversion, we'll have a 12-hour head start." 12 hours isn't much. "No," Caleb agreed, "it's not, which is why we keep moving. I've got supplies cached 2 days north. Food, ammunition, fresh horses. We reach those, our odds improve considerably. And then what? We run forever." Caleb looked at her properly for the first time since they'd stopped. Really looked at her. His eyes were hard but not cruel, and Eliza saw a deep weariness there that matched her own. "There's a town," he said. "Redstone, about 80 miles north of here. It's small, remote, but it's got something most frontier towns don't." "What?" "People who believe in protecting their own. We get you there, get you established. Dalton's legal papers won't mean much. Town's in a different territory, different jurisdiction. His reach doesn't extend that far." "You seem very certain of that." "I am." Something dark flickered across his face. "Because I'm hiding there too." Before Eliza could ask what he meant, Caleb pulled a cloth from his saddlebag and pressed it to the wound on his arm. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. Without thinking, Eliza moved to help, taking the cloth from him. "Let me," she said. "You saved my life. Least I can do is keep you from bleeding to death." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. He shrugged out of his jacket and rolled up his sleeve, revealing a deep graze across his bicep. The bullet had carved a furrow through muscle, but missed the bone. Eliza cleaned it as best she could with water from the canteen, her hands steady despite everything. "You've done this before," Caleb observed. "My mother was the closest thing to a doctor in our town," Eliza said quietly. "I helped her set bones, stitch wounds, deliver babies." She tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it tight around his arm. She said every woman should know basic medicine, because you never know when you'll need it. Her throat tightened. "She taught me other things too. How to read the stars, how to find water in the desert, how to identify plants that heal and plants that kill." Eliza's hands paused in their work. "There's a plant, Palo Verde. It grows near water sources. Always. The Apache taught her that when she was young, before she married my father." She tied off the bandage. She lived alone for 5 years after he died, just her and me in a cabin 20 miles from the nearest town. She survived because she paid attention, learned from everyone, stored knowledge like other people that store grain for winter. Smart woman. She was. Eliza's voice broke slightly. She died 6 months ago. Pneumonia. After that, my stepfather, she couldn't finish the sentence. Sold you to the highest bidder. Caleb finished flatly. I'm sorry, you deserve better. Nobody gets what they deserve, Eliza said, echoing his earlier words. They get what they survive. Caleb's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. You'll do fine in Redstone. The people there understand that philosophy. They rested for 2 hours, taking turns keeping watch. Eliza meant to stay awake during her watch, but exhaustion dragged her under like an undertow. She woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder and the sky already lightening in the east. We need to move, he said. Can you ride? Every muscle in Eliza's body screamed in protest, but she nodded. Yes. They mounted up and headed north as the sun broke the horizon. The landscape changed gradually. Less sand, more rock. Patches of scrub grass growing more frequent. They rode in silence, both scanning constantly for signs of pursuit. Around midday, they stopped briefly to rest the horse and eat some dried meat from Caleb's supplies. Tell me about the town, Eliza said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. Redstone, what's it like? Caleb considered the question. Small, maybe 200 people. They've got a general store, a boarding house, a blacksmith, no law to speak of. Nearest marshal is 4 days' ride. If there's no law, what stops men like Dalton from just taking what they want? The people. Caleb's voice was firm. Redstone was founded by folks who didn't fit anywhere else. Former soldiers, freed slaves, Mexicans fleeing violence down south, women who left bad situations. They protect each other because nobody else will. He paused. It's not paradise, but it's honest, and they'll let you stay. Just like that, you'll need to earn your keep, work in the store, help the women who run the boarding house, something useful. But yeah, they'll let you stay. His jaw tightened. They let me stay, and I've got a lot more blood on my hands than you do. In the casual way he said it made Eliza look at him more closely. Caleb Ross was probably 30, maybe a few years older, with the kind of weathered face that came from years in harsh conditions. The scar on his face was old, long-healed, but there were others, a nick on his ear, faded marks on his knuckles. This was a man who'd lived through violence and carried the proof on his skin. What did you do? She asked quietly, before hiding in Redstone. Caleb stared at the horizon for a long moment. Soldier for a while, then a hired gun. Did things I'm not proud of for men who deserved worse than they got. He took a breath. Eventually I drew a line, said there were hops I wouldn't take, people I wouldn't hurt. My employers didn't appreciate that. What kind of jobs? The kind that involved children. His voice went hard, flat. Eliza stared at the campfire, Caleb's question hanging in the air. What aren't you telling me? She took a breath. When Dalton touched my chin that first night, tilted my face up like I was livestock being inspected. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I just froze. Her hands clenched, and I hated myself for it, for letting him treat me like property, for not being strong enough to... You stabbed him with a fire poker, Caleb interrupted. That's pretty damn strong. After he'd already owned me for 2 days. Eliza's voice cracked. 2 days I let him believe he could buy a human being for $400 and stop. Caleb's hand found hers. You didn't let him do anything. He took. That's what predators do. But you know what else you did? What? You fought back, every single step. That's not weakness, Eliza. That's survival. She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. I'm not property, she whispered. I won't be property ever again. No, Caleb agreed. You won't. A man named Garrett Sloan owns half of New Mexico territory. Rich, powerful, connected. I was his enforcer, the man he sent when someone needed convincing. Or removing. Caleb's hands clenched on the reins. 8 months ago, he ordered me to kill a family. Father, mother, 3 kids under 10. They'd homesteaded on land Sloan wanted. refused to sell. He told me to make it look like Apaches did it. The words hung in the desert air. I'd done bad things before that. Killed men who probably didn't deserve it. Hurt people who were just trying to survive. But I'd never killed children. Never killed women who weren't trying to kill me first. You refused. I refused. Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper now. Sloan sent 4 other men to do the job, then put a price on my head. $5,000 dead or alive. Said I'd stolen from him. Killed one of his men. Was a traitor. He looked at Eliza directly. Within a week, every bounty hunter and hired gun west of the Mississippi knew my face. I've been running for 8 months. Killed 3 men who came for me. Lost 2 others in the desert. Barely escaped 4 more in Santa Fe. That's why you helped me, Eliza said slowly. You couldn't save those children. But you could save me. Maybe. Caleb's expression was unreadable. Or maybe I was just tired of running. Tired of being alone. Tired of feeling like everything I touched turns to blood and ashes. He paused. When I saw you tied up fighting even though you had no chance of winning, I don't know. Something in me said this was a line I could hold. A person I could save. Maybe start balancing the scales for all the people I hurt. Does it balance the scales? No. The word was absolute. It never does, but it's better than doing nothing. They remounted and continued northward, the confession hanging between them like smoke. Eliza understood now why Caleb moved like he did, why his eyes never stopped scanning, why he'd risked his life for a stranger. He was trying to outrun his past by saving her future. It wouldn't work, she knew that. You couldn't outrun guilt any more than you could outrun your own shadow. But she was grateful anyway. As the sun climbed toward its peak, Eliza saw dust on the southern horizon. She pointed it out to Caleb, her heart sinking. I see it, he said grimly. Been watching it for the last 10 minutes. That's riders, at least 6, maybe more. They're moving fast, pushing their horses hard. Dalton's men. Probably. He urged the paint into a faster trot, and Eliza matched his pace on the mare. We've got maybe 2 hours before they close the distance. There's rough country ahead, canyons, rock formations. We can lose them there if we're smart. And if we're not smart, then we make a stand and hope we're better shots than they are. The rough country appeared exactly when Caleb had predicted, a maze of red rock canyons and narrow passages that twisted through the landscape like veins. He led them into the deepest canyon, the walls rising 30 feet on either side, blocking out half the sky. The horses' hooves echoed on stone. This feels like a trap, Eliza said, eyeing the narrow canyons. It is, for them. Caleb pointed ahead where the canyon split into 3 different passages. We take the eastern fork. It comes out 2 miles north into open country. The other 2 are dead ends. If they split up a search, we buy more time. If they don't split up, we're already gone. They took the eastern passage, moving as quickly as the uncertain footing allowed. Behind them, growing closer, Eliza could hear the sound of many horses, men's voices echoing off the canyon walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The passage narrowed, then opened suddenly into a wider area where a rockfall had partially blocked the way. Caleb dismounted quickly, studying the terrain with the eye of someone who'd spent years reading land for tactical advantage. Take the horses through, he told Eliza. There's enough room if you go single file. I'll be right behind you. What are you doing? Making sure they take the wrong turns. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Go now. Eliza wanted to argue, but the sound of pursuit was too close. She led the buckskin through the narrow gap, the paint following their bodies, scraping against stone. On the other side, the passage continued northward, gradually widening. A gunshot cracked behind her, then another. Eliza's hands tightened on the reins. She heard men shouting, horses whinnying. Then Caleb appeared running low, his rifle smoking. He swung onto the paint without breaking stride. Go, he shouted, fast as you can. They ran the horses through the twisting passage, branches of rock reaching overhead like skeletal fingers. More gunshots behind them, but distant now. Confused. Caleb's gambit had worked. He'd fired into the canyon, creating echoes that bounced off multiple walls, making it impossible to tell which passage the shots came from. The canyon opened abruptly onto open prairie, and they burst out into sunshine and space. Caleb immediately turned them east, away from the direct northern route. They'll expect us to go straight for Redstone. He explained, pushing the paint into a ground-eating lope. We'll circle around, come at it from the west. Adds a day to our journey, but it might throw them off. Will we have enough supplies for an extra day? We'll have to. His jaw was set, his eyes hard, because the alternative is getting caught. And I'm not going back to the people hunting me. And you're sure as hell not going back to Marcus Dalton. They rode hard for another hour before Caleb finally slowed the pace. The horses were lathered with sweat, breathing hard. He led them to a small creek where they could drink and rest while he and Eliza kept watch. Eliza dismounted on legs that barely held her and immediately bent to splash water on her face. The cold shock of it cleared her head slightly. When she straightened, she found Caleb watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she asked. "You're tougher than you look," he said. "Most people would have given up by now, would have broken." "I'm scared." The words came out before Eliza could stop them. "I'm terrified, actually. Every time I close my eyes, I see Dalton's face. I feel his hands on me. I hear him talking about breaking me like I'm a horse." Her voice shook. "And I keep thinking about his other wives, about how they must have felt, trapped in that house, knowing they were going to die and nobody was going to save them." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm scared that even if we make it to Redstone, even if I'm safe there, I'll never really escape, that I'll always be looking over my shoulder, always waiting for him to come back, always feeling like property instead of a person." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what the difference is between you and those other women?" "What?" "You fought back. You stole a horse and rode into the desert even though you knew you'd probably die. You cut Jake Morrison. You hit Dalton with that fire poker." His voice was firm. "You didn't just survive. You resisted every single step. And that matters. That's the difference between being a victim and being a survivor." "I don't feel like a survivor," Eliza said quietly. "I feel like I'm barely hanging on." "Then hang on." Caleb met her eyes. "Because once we reach Redstone, once you are behind those walls with those people, Dalton can't touch you. Not legally, not physically, not without starting a war he can't win." "You really believe that?" "I do." But there was something in his voice, some hesitation. "What aren't you telling me?" Eliza asked. Caleb looked away. "The men hunting me. Sloane's men. They're professionals. And $5,000 is enough to make them persistent." He paused. "If they've tracked me this far north, which they might have, they could be waiting in Redstone, or between here and there. So we're running from two different groups." "Yeah. And if they find us, then we fight." Caleb's hand rested on his rifle. "But I'm hoping it doesn't come to that." They remounted and continued eastward, then gradually curved back north as the sun began its descent. The land rolled in gentle swells, offering occasional cover, but nothing substantial. If Dalton's men spotted them out here, there'd be nowhere to hide. Nowhere to run except forward. As darkness fell, Caleb found a depression in the land. Barely enough to hide the horses, but better than being exposed on the open prairie. They made another cold camp, eating sparingly, speaking in whispers. "2 more days," Caleb said, staring at the stars. 2 days and we're at Redstone. The townspeople won't hand you over even if Dalton shows up with papers and a dozen men. They've got their own sense of justice. You said there's no law there. What if he just takes me by force? Then the town fights back. Caleb's expression was grim. They've done it before. 3 years ago, a man tried to take a Chinese woman from the boarding house. Said she was his property. Had papers showing she was indentured to him. The town told him to leave. He paused. He came back with 8 hired guns, lost 5 of them before he rode off. The woman's still in Redstone, running a laundry. People died defending a stranger. They died defending the principle that you don't own people. Caleb's voice was firm. That matters in Redstone. It's why folks like me, like you, end up there. It's the last place west where your past doesn't define your future. They took turns sleeping, 2 hours each, the other keeping watch. During Eliza's watch around midnight, she saw lights in the distance, campfires, at least 3 of them, too far away to pose immediate danger but close enough to confirm they were still being hunted. When she woke Caleb for his turn, she pointed out the fires. He studied them in silence, counting, calculating. They're spread out, he murmured, searching in a grid pattern. Smart. Dalton must have hired someone who actually knows tracking. Can we outrun them? We're going to try. He checked his rifle, the pistol at his hip. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. But Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay under the stars listening to the night sounds and thought about the last 5 days. 5 days ago, she'd been a 19-year-old girl living in her stepfather's house, hoping desperately for any future that wasn't Marcus Dalton. Now she was a fugitive in men's clothes riding across the frontier with a killer who'd found his conscience running toward a town that might be sanctuary or might be just another place she'd have to flee from. But she wasn't property anymore, wasn't tied up, wasn't being sold, wasn't waiting in a locked room for a monster to claim her. She was free, even if that freedom was temporary, even if it came with bullets chasing her across the desert. She'd choose this freedom with all its dangers over that captivity with all its false comforts. A sound made her tense, not from outside, from Caleb. She turned to see him sitting up, his rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness. But his hands were shaking. Caleb, she said quietly. He didn't respond at first. Then, I keep seeing them, the children, the family that Sloan wanted me to kill. His voice was barely audible. I see them every time I close my eyes. 3 kids, a boy maybe 8, 2 girls younger. They're playing in the yard when I ride up. The boy waves at me. He took a shuddering breath. He waves like I'm a friend, like I'm there to help. But you didn't kill them, Eliza said. You refused. I refused, but someone else did it. 4 days later, burned their house, shot them when they ran out. His hands clenched. I could have warned them, could have told them to run, but I didn't. I just rode away, told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. Without thinking, Eliza moved closer, sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. You drew a line, she said quietly. That's more than most men would do, and you're trying to make it right now by helping me. It doesn't make it right. No, but it's something. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused, rough, but they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. We're both running from things we can't change, Eliza said. We're both carrying weight that's too heavy. But maybe if we help each other carry it, it gets a little lighter. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not romance, they were both too damaged, too exhausted for that, but connection, recognition. 2 people who'd found each other in the wasteland and refused to let go. Thank you, he said simply. They sat like that for a long moment, shoulders touching hands, clasped under a sky full of stars. Then Caleb gently released her hand. Get some sleep. I'll keep watch. Eliza lay back down, but this time sleep came easier, because for the first time in months, she didn't feel utterly alone. Dawn came gray and cold. They rode before the sun crested the horizon, pushing the horses hard. The prairie gave way to rolling hills covered in pinyon pine and juniper. Better cover, but also better ambush sites. Caleb kept them moving along the ridge lines where they could see trouble coming. Around noon, they spotted riders ahead, not behind them. Ahead. 4 men on a rise silhouetted against the sky. Caleb reined in sharply, pulling Eliza with him into a stand of trees. Sloan's men, he said, his voice tight. I recognized the horses. They must have heard about Dalton's chase, figured I'd be moving north, set up to intercept. So we're trapped. Dalton behind us, Sloan's men ahead. Not trapped, just inconvenienced. Caleb studied the terrain, his mind visibly working through options. There's a canyon system to the west, rough country, hard riding, but it cuts north and comes out near Redstone's eastern approach. If we can reach it before either group spots us. A gunshot cracked. Bark exploded from the tree next to Eliza's head. The 4 men on the ridge were moving, riding hard toward their position. They've seen us, Caleb snarled. Move! They broke from cover at a full gallop, angling west toward the canyons Caleb had mentioned. More gunshots behind them, but at this range and speed, the chances of a hit were minimal. Still, Eliza felt her heart hammering, felt the buckskin mare stretching out beneath her, running for both their lives. The canyon mouth appeared like a wound in the earth, a jagged slash that dropped steeply downward. Caleb didn't hesitate, sending the paint plunging down the rocky slope. Eliza followed the mare's hooves scrambling for purchase, small rocks cascading around them. A fall here would mean broken bones at best, death at worst. They hit the canyon floor and Caleb immediately turned them deeper into the maze. The walls rose around them, cutting off the sky, turning daylight into twilight. Behind them, Eliza could hear their pursuers reaching the canyon mouth, hear someone shouting orders. "They'll split up," Caleb said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Try to box us in. We need to keep moving. Stay ahead of them." The canyon twisted like a snake, branching and rejoining, creating a labyrinth of stone. Caleb navigated it with confidence that suggested he'd scouted this route before. They splashed through a shallow stream, climbed a steep section where the horses had to scramble, emerged into a wider area where sunlight filtered down from above, and found 5 men waiting for them, Dalton's men. Eliza recognized Monroe and Phillips among them. They'd somehow gotten ahead, probably knew this country better than she'd given them credit for. They had rifles leveled, and at this range they wouldn't miss. "End of the line," Monroe called out. "Get off the horses, both of you." Caleb's hand moved toward his rifle, but Phillips fired a warning shot that kicked up dust at the paint's feet. The horse danced nervously. "Don't," Phillips warned. "We've got you dead to rights. Mr. Dalton wants the girl back alive." He paused, his rifle trained on Caleb. "He didn't say nothing about you being alive. So you can come easy or you can die here. Your choice." Eliza saw Caleb's jaw tighten, saw him calculating odds that were clearly impossible. 5 men with rifles against 2 with limited ammunition and no cover. It was suicide. "Caleb," she said quietly, "don't. I'm not letting them take you back. You can't stop them. Not here. Not like this." She was surprised by how calm her voice was. "They'll kill you, and then they'll take me anyway. At least if you're alive, maybe there's another chance." "Listen to the girl," Monroe said. "She's smarter than you are. Now get down off those horses before I put a bullet through your knee and drag you down." Caleb dismounted slowly, his hands visible. Eliza did the same, her mind racing. There had to be something, some option they weren't seeing, some way out of this. But the canyon walls were too steep to climb, the men too spread out, their guns too steady. Monroe walked forward, rifle trained on Caleb. "You're the one who burned Mr. Dalton's property, killed 2 of his men. He wants you to pay for that." "I'll pay for it when hell freezes over," Caleb said flatly. "That can be arranged." Monroe raised his rifle, aiming at Caleb's chest, and Eliza knew with absolute certainty that he was going to fire, that in the next 3 seconds Caleb Ross would be dead, and she would be dragged back to Marcus Dalton's ranch, to that locked room, to that fate worse than death. The gunshot that rang out didn't come from Monroe's rifle. It came from above, from the canyon rim, and it took Monroe in the shoulder. He spun, crying out, his rifle falling. 2 more shots followed in rapid succession. Phillips went down, clutching his leg. Another man dropped his rifle and dove for cover. Eliza looked up and saw figures on the canyon rim. 5, 6, maybe more. They were shooting with precision, not trying to kill, but clearly capable of it. The remaining Dalton men scattered, looking for cover that didn't exist. And within 30 seconds, they were either wounded or fleeing back the way they'd come. A rope dropped from the canyon rim, and a moment later, a man was rappelling down. He hit the canyon floor and straightened. Older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a sun-weathered face that was somehow both hard and kind. "Caleb Ross," the man said. "Heard you were headed our way. Thought you might appreciate some help." Caleb's face broke into something that might have been a smile. "Samuel, you have excellent timing." "Samuel Wright," the older man said, extending a hand to Eliza. "I run Redstone, or try to anyway. It's like herding cats, but someone's got to do it." He looked back up at the canyon rim and whistled sharply. "All clear. Bring down the horses." More ropes dropped, and with practiced efficiency, men and women descended into the canyon. They were a mixed group, white and black and brown, young and old, but they all moved with the same purposeful confidence, and they were all armed. "Dalton's men will regroup," a tall woman with dark skin said to Samuel. "We've got maybe an hour before they come back with reinforcements." "Then we move fast." Samuel turned to Caleb and Eliza. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Then let's go." Redstone's 3 hours hard ride north. By the time Dalton figures out where we went, we'll be behind walls with 50 armed citizens who won't take kindly to him, trying to take back what he thinks he owns. They mounted fresh horses the Redstone people had brought extras and moved out at speed. Samuel took the lead, guiding them through passages Eliza would never have found on her own, gradually climbing out of the canyon system and onto open ground. As they rode, Eliza found herself next to the tall woman who'd spoken earlier. "Why did you come for us?" Eliza asked. "You don't even know me." The woman glanced at her. Something like sympathy flickered across her face. "I was property once. Slave in Louisiana before the war set me free. I know what it looks like when someone's running for their life. Figured if I could help, I should." "What's your name?" "Ruth. I run the boarding house in Redstone with my husband." She nodded toward a burly man riding point. "That's him. Thomas. We built that place to be a sanctuary for people who need one. You'll be safe there. What if Dalton comes? What if he brings an army? Then we fight." Ruth said it simply, as if it were obvious. "We fought before, we'll fight again. That's what community means. Protecting each other even when it costs something." They rode hard through the afternoon, the landscape changing as they climbed into higher country. The air grew cooler, pine trees more frequent, and then as the sun touched the western horizon, Eliza saw it. A collection of buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, light glowing in windows. Redstone. It wasn't much to look at, maybe 30 buildings total clustered around a central square. But after days of desert and pursuit and violence, it looked like the most beautiful place Eliza had ever seen. Samuel led them straight to the boarding house, a two-story structure that dominated one side of the square. People were already gathering word, having spread of their arrival. Eliza saw curiosity in their faces, but also something else: acceptance, recognition. These were people who understood what it meant to run, to need sanctuary. She dismounted on legs that barely held her, and Ruth was immediately there steadying her. "Come on inside. You look like you could use food, a bath, and about 12 hours of sleep." "Dalton's men are coming," Eliza said. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. I don't want to bring trouble to your town." "Honey," Ruth said gently, "trouble was already here. We just decided a long time ago that some troubles are worth facing together. Now come on, let's get you settled." The next 36 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Redstone transformed into a fortress. Men reinforced doors and shuttered windows. Women inventoried medical supplies and prepared bandages. The town's single blacksmith worked overtime making barricades from scrap metal. The scream came from the second floor of the boarding house. Eliza looked up from the ammunition she was counting. Ruth was already moving, taking the stairs two at a time. "It's Maria," Ruth called down. "Baby's coming early. I need help." Eliza's hands moved before her mind caught up. She grabbed the medical kit she'd been organizing and followed Ruth upstairs. Maria was young, 17 at most, Mexican girl who'd fled north after her family was killed. She'd been at Redstone for 3 months, her belly growing steadily. Now she lay on the bed, face slick with sweat, hands gripping the sheets. "Too early," Ruth muttered. "She's got another month to go." "Stress," Eliza said, kneeling beside the bed. "Fear can trigger labor. My mother delivered 3 premature babies. I helped with 2. Her hands moved with confidence her mother had trained into her. Checking dilation, feeling the baby's position, counting contractions. "Baby's breech," she said quietly. Ruth's face went pale. "Can you papai?" "I can try." For the next 2 hours, while men fortified the town below and prepared for Dalton's attack, Eliza fought a different battle. Turning the baby, coaching Maria through contractions, using every scrap of knowledge her mother had given her. When the baby finally came small, blue, not breathing, Eliza cleared its airway with fingers that didn't shake, rubbed its tiny chest, breathed into its mouth the way her mother had taught her. The baby gasped, coughed, cried. Maria sobbed with relief. Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth, and Eliza looked down at this tiny fighting life and felt something shift inside her. She'd been so focused on survival, on escape, on not being property. But this was what freedom was for. Not just existing, but creating, nurturing, passing on life and knowledge and hope. "Thank you," Maria whispered in Spanish. "Gracias, gracias." Eliza cleaned the baby, wrapped her in soft cloth, placed her in Maria's arms. What will you name her? Ruth asked. Maria looked at Eliza. Esperanza, she said. Hope. They moved furniture to create firing positions, stockpiled food and water, set up a makeshift infirmary in the dining room. You know how to shoot? Ruth asked, handing Eliza a rifle. My mother taught me. I'm not great, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if it's close enough. That'll do. But the attack never came. On the second morning, a lone rider approached from the south. Not Dalton's men. A young Mexican man, dust-covered and exhausted, leading a worn-out horse. Carlos, the man Samuel had sent to Tucson for courthouse documents. He carried a leather satchel full of papers. Property transfers, deeds, financial records showing Marcus Dalton had purchased 12 women over 5 years, not 3, all marked deceased within 2 years. A woman named Annie Young with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers spread the documents across the boarding house table. Perfect, she breathed. This is everything we need. She looked at Samuel. I already sent the story by telegraph 2 days ago. Had to ride to Millerville, 20 miles east. My contact in Denver printed it in yesterday's edition. Her smile was fierce. By now, copies are spreading across the territory. Marcus Dalton's name is being dragged through the mud in every saloon and general store from here to the California border. Samuel nodded slowly. Then we wait. See if Dalton's smart enough to cut his losses. Sunset approached with agonizing slowness. The town was silent, everyone at their positions, weapons ready. Eliza stood at the second-floor window of the boarding house, a rifle in her hands, watching the southern horizon. As the sun touched the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, riders appeared. Lots of riders. Eliza counted as they came into view. 30, 35, 40. They stopped just outside rifle range, a dark mass of men and horses silhouetted against the dying light. Here we go, Ruth murmured beside her. Whatever happens, Eliza, you stay down. Don't be a hero. These people are fighting for you, but you dying in the process defeats the purpose. Marcus Dalton rode forward from the group, flanked by 2 men. Even at this distance, Eliza recognized his bulk, his expensive clothes. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, Eliza Hart, I know you're in there. Come out and this ends peacefully. Nobody has to die. Samuel appeared on the porch of the boarding house, his rifle cradled in his arms. And beside him, rifle in her own hands, stood Eliza. Eliza Hart, Dalton's voice cracked across the distance. I know you're in there. Come out and this ends peacefully. She stepped forward into the dying light. I'm right here, Dalton. Her voice didn't shake. But I'm not your property. I never was. You can't buy a human being for $400. You can't own someone's soul with a piece of paper. She raised her rifle. You called me livestock, merchandise, property, but you were wrong. I am fire, and fire can't be owned. It can only burn. Silence, then Dalton's laugh, harsh and disbelieving. You think a speech changes anything? I've got 45 men. You've got a town full of people who believe freedom is worth dying for. Eliza finished. How many of your men believe you're worth dying for? The murmuring among Dalton's men started then. I've got 45 men who say different. Dalton's voice was tight with rage. I'm giving you one last chance. Send her out or we burn this town to the ground. You try that and you'll be burying half your men. Samuel called back. We're dug in and we're ready to fight. Is your pride worth that many lives? There was a long pause. Eliza could see Dalton conferring with the men beside him, see the tension in his posture. The other riders shifted restlessly, some clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Then from the north, more riders appeared, a smaller group, maybe 10 men. They rode toward Dalton's position and stopped. And even from a distance, Eliza could see they weren't joining Dalton's forces. They were watching, waiting. That's Sloan's men, Caleb said quietly, appearing at Eliza's other side. They're not here for you. They're here for me. What do? We see if men value their lives more than their paychecks. Samuel seemed to have the same thought. He called out again, louder this time, addressing both groups. You men out there, you're being paid to fight, not to die. The man you're working for, Dalton, is finished. His reputation is destroyed. Newspapers across the territory are calling him a slaver and a murderer. You really want to die for a man who's already lost. Murmuring among Dalton's men, Eliza could see it even from here. The uncertainty, the doubt. Some were already turning their horses, preparing to leave. And you men from the north, Samuel continued, you're hunting a bounty. But that bounty means nothing if you're dead. You want to ride against a fortified town full of people defending their home. How many of you will survive is $5,000 worth more than your life. More murmuring. One of Sloane's men dismounted, speaking urgently to the others. They were arguing, clearly divided. Dalton was screaming now, trying to hold his forces together. I'm paying you, I own that girl. We're taking her back. But his men were already breaking away. 10, then 15, then 20. They turned their horses and rode off into the twilight, wanting no part of a battle that had already been lost before the first shot was fired. Dalton's voice rose to a shriek, cursing them, threatening them. But they kept riding. Within 5 minutes, Dalton was sitting on his horse with maybe a dozen men left. Sloane's group had split. Half rode away, deciding the bounty wasn't worth it. But 5 remained, watching Caleb with cold, professional eyes. This isn't over, Dalton screamed at the town. You hear me? This isn't over. But it was, and everyone knew it. Without the numbers to overwhelm Redstone's defenses, without the support of men who now knew they were fighting for a losing cause, Dalton had nothing left but empty threats. He turned his horse and rode south, his remaining men following. They disappeared into the growing darkness, and a cheer went up from the town. People emerged from their positions, laughing and crying and embracing. The tension of the last days finally breaking. But Caleb was still watching the 5 men from the north. They hadn't left. They sat their horses in the twilight, waiting. Finally, one of them rode forward. He stopped at the edge of town and called out, Caleb Ross, we've been hunting you for 8 months. $5,000 is good money, but you found yourself some good friends. I respect that. So what now? Caleb called back. Now we ride away, but not because we're scared, because I'm tired of chasing ghosts across the territory. Tell Garrett Sloane if he wants you dead, he can do it himself. The man paused, then added, You watch your back, Ross. Some men won't be as reasonable. They turned and rode north, disappearing into the darkness. And just like that, it was over. Both threats, both groups of armed men, gone, retreating into the night, choosing life over violence, survival over pride. Samuel found Eliza on the porch, staring after Dalton's retreating form. It's done, he said gently. You're free, legally, morally, completely free. Dalton's finished. He won't come after you again. He can't afford to. Eliza felt her knees give out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, and suddenly she was crying. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. All the fear, all the tension, all the accumulated horror of the last week came pouring out. Ruth appeared, wrapping strong arms around her, holding her while she cried. It's all right, Ruth murmured. Let it out. You're safe now. You're home. Home, the words settled into Eliza's heart like a seed finding soil. She'd never had a real home. Her mother's house had always been temporary. Her stepfather's ranch had been a prison. But here, in Redstone, surrounded by people who'd risked everything to protect her freedom, she felt like she belonged. Winter came to Redstone with snow that transformed the valley into something from a painting. Eliza knelt in the snow beside her daughter. Sarah was 6 weeks old, too young really for what Eliza was teaching her, but Eliza's mother had started young too. Feel this, Eliza whispered, guiding Sarah's tiny hand to touch the horse's leg. The old mare stood patient, used to Eliza's lessons. This is a horse. She'll carry you when you need to run. She'll save your life if you treat her right. Sarah's fingers curled against the warm hide. Caleb watched from the porch, a smile playing at his lips. She's 6 weeks old, Eliza. She can't understand you. My mother started teaching me survival at 6 weeks too, Eliza said. She'd whisper Apache plant names while nursing me, tell me stories about reading stars while I fell asleep. She lifted Sarah, cradling her close. By the time I was old enough to run, I already knew how. The knowledge was in my bones. And you want Sarah to have that too. I want her to never need it, Eliza corrected, but to have it anyway. Because knowledge is freedom, and freedom is the only thing worth fighting for, Caleb finished. Tiny and perfect, with her mother's copper hair and eyes that hadn't yet decided their color. They'd named her Sarah, after Eliza's mother. Caleb appeared behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "She's finally asleep," Eliza whispered. "Took 2 hours of rocking." "She's stubborn. Wonder where she gets that." Eliza smiled, leaned back against him. They'd married in autumn, a ceremony that was more party than formal event. The whole town turning out, Samuel officiating, Ruth crying happy tears, Thomas providing music on a battered fiddle. There had been no white dress, no church, no traditional vows. Just two people who'd found each other in the wasteland, promising to face whatever came next together. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked quietly. "Running, fighting, all of it." "Never," Eliza said immediately. "Even the worst parts. Being chased, being scared, not knowing if I'd survive another day. It was all worth it to get here." She turned to look at him, this scarred, damaged man who'd risked everything for a stranger and somehow ended up becoming her everything. "I was someone's property, Caleb. I was going to dine in Marcus Dalton's house. Just another name on a list of women who didn't matter. But I fought back. I survived. And I found this place. These people. You." She paused. "So no, I don't regret any of it." "Your stepfather sold you for $400, Caleb said. "Dalton thought he could own you. Sloane's men thought they could collect their bounty. They were all wrong. You know why, White King. Because you can't own fire. You can't trap it or contain it or make it behave. You can only respect it or get burned trying to control it." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "You're fire, Eliza. Always have been. I'm just lucky enough to be the one standing close enough to feel the warmth." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. But they weren't sad tears. They were the tears that came when you finally found the words you'd been searching for your whole life. "I love you," she said. "Not because you saved me, though you did. Not because I need you, though maybe I do. But because you looked at me and saw a person, not property. You treated me like I had value when everyone else saw me as something to be bought and sold." "I love you too," Caleb replied. "And I promise you this. No one will ever own you again. No one will ever treat you as less than you are. And if they try, they'll have to go through me first." Movement on the northern ridge caught Eliza's eye. A lone rider, watching the town. Her hand tightened on Caleb's. Caleb, he'd already seen. His other hand moved to the rifle leaning against the porch rail. They watched as the rider sat motionless for a long moment, then raised one hand, not in threat, in acknowledgement, and rode away. "Sloane's tracker," Caleb said quietly. "Still out there, still watching. Will they come back?" "Maybe, probably." He squeezed her hand. "But not tonight. And when they do, we'll be ready." Eliza looked at the town spread below them, at the lights in windows, at smoke rising from chimneys, at the life they'd built here. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, trapped, terrified, certain she was going to die in the desert or in Marcus Dalton's locked room. And she thought about the woman she'd become, free, fierce, a mother, a wife, a member of a community that valued her for who she was, not what she could be used for. "Let them come," she said quietly. "We survived Dalton. We'll survive whatever comes next." Caleb smiled. "Yes, we will." They stood on the porch as the last light faded from the sky, watching the stars come out one by one. Behind them, their daughter slept peacefully. Around them, the town of Redstone settled into evening routines. And ahead of them stretched years of possibility, of choices made together, of a future that belonged to them and no one else. Eliza Hart had been told she was someone's first. The first woman her stepfather sold. The first property Marcus Dalton purchased with his new papers. But she'd become someone's last instead. The last woman who'd ever be owned. The last person Caleb Ross would ever have to rescue. The last of something old and terrible, and the first of something new and precious. She was free, completely, wholly, permanently free. And in that freedom, she'd found something more valuable than safety or security or survival. She'd found home.